Decentralized finance, or DeFi, has quickly emerged as one of the transformative use cases of blockchain technology. But why do businesses need DeFi? Simply put, it eliminates the intermediaries in traditional finance systems, think banks, brokerages, and insurers, replacing them with smart contracts that execute financial transactions automatically. Now, this brings and next level transparency, efficiency, and security to businesses. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Analytics Insight podcast, where we explore ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Dialani. Now, blockchain is one of the hottest topics almost all around the world, especially with the beginning of the 21st century. There are many major developments and changes seen in financial technologies like blockchain. Now, what it really means and what it stands for the global economy today is very important. So today we are going to dive deep into the need for decentralized finance in businesses, how Web3 differs from Web2, and some of the crucial problems the Web3 industry is solving, both in India as well as globally. So let's welcome Mr. Chris Chabot, Vice President of Developer Relations at Shardeum. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Hi there, Priya. I'm doing really well. Thank you. And thank you for having me here.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Chris. And I think we are going to touch upon some important aspects in terms of decentralized finance. But of course, before we dive deeper into these aspects, we would of course first like to know more about Shardeum. A very pretty name, a very interesting name sounds to me. So
Yeah,
can you help us understand, more about the organization specialization?
absolutely. Well, let me start with the name Shardeum because that already gives away some of the goals that we have as an organization. Shardeum is a combination of the word sharding, which is a technology for making a network perform faster and making it linearly scalable. And the other part of the name comes from Ethereum because we're Ethereum compatible. So it takes everything that Ethereum has to offer about running dApps, being able to talk to it programmatically, transferring value between parties, but making it much more scalable and cheaper to use. One of the challenges that crypto and Web3 has faced for a very long time is that it is hard to participate and use in a normal day-to-day sense. And what I mean with that is that transactions can take a very long time to process. Like if you have to wait 10, 15 minutes, that is fine if you're investing in some stock, but it's not fine if you're buying a loaf of bread, right? So there's definitely a sliding scale there of what amount of wait time is okay with what kind of transaction. So one of our goals is to solve that problem where every transaction is incredibly fast. The other challenge is that because of the way that a lot of crypto chains are designed, it is expensive to do a transaction. There's a lot of math or a lot of compute power involved in it. And of course, the end user has to pay for that. So you end up paying like what, 10, 20, $30 for each transaction. Again, that strongly limits the participation that is possible. So Shardium aims to solve all of those. And we see that as solving the blockchain trilemma. The blockchain trilemma is often explained as scalability, security, and decentralization, where for a very long time, people assumed it was impossible to solve all three of those. And that is what Shardium is doing. With that, we've been building that for the last 2 years. We're now getting very close to launching our mainnets where this will be available to everyone. But with that, we will have an L1 chain where it's easy to participate in running a validator node because there's only a low staking amount. And we support tens of thousands of people participating and running the network. It will be cheap to use because every transaction will be about a cent or a fraction of a cent. So suddenly those transaction fees go away. And it is fully secure and decentralized as well. So that combination is unique. We're very excited about it.
Great. That's pretty interesting, Chris. Thank you for sharing that. A very brief introduction and insightful conversation about Chardium, definitely. If you talk about Chris, I think, Chris, you have a very rich background in global team leadership, and you have held notable roles as head of international developer relations at Twitter and head of developer relations for Google Plus. So we would like to know more about you, Chris. How has your journey been till date? If you could tell us more about your role and, what probably got your interest in Shardium.
Absolutely. I am going to take a step back though and start way earlier in my life. When I was growing up, I was reading a lot about cool stuff in encyclopedias because that was pre-internet days. I remember reading about a printing press. And the printing press was interesting because originally it was used to print Bibles and works by the classic philosophers. Took a whole bunch of decades before the first fictional novels were published. But it wasn't until 120 years after that where the printing press was used by a group of people that called themselves the College of Natural Philosophers. And the College of Natural Philosophers said, we're not going to hold anything to be true unless it can be proven to be true. And they did that by writing down not just outcomes of experiments, but also how to reproduce it so that other people could verify it. And they would send it to Cambridge. They would put that in a book, distribute it to everyone that was a member of that society so they could verify those findings. Now, that was the start of scientific method. And that's, of course, what enables all this cool stuff we're using today to talk to each other, but powers our entire life pretty much, right? So that invention of scientific method, even though it wasn't created by the printing press, it was enabled by it. And that just to me was such an incredibly powerful idea. So that has fascinated me about technology because when I saw computers and internet happening, I was like, Jesus, this is going to be another printing press moment. Oh my goodness, like this is going to fundamentally change the course of human history. So I've gone through everything from the earliest days, there's content management systems, then Web 2.0, then social became a big thing. And that's why I joined Google as well to run one of their social efforts called Open Social, a standard for running games and applications inside of social networks. And I joined there because the role that I had, developer relations, was a combination of a lot of hardcore technology and code and all that engineering stuff, but also about inspiring people and helping them to be successful in new technologies, telling the story of why does this matter and what does it allow me to do? And of course, helping them to accomplish those things as well. So I've done that throughout my career for the last 20 years. And I started at Google, ended up leading some pretty large projects there. And the goal has always been to explain to developers and startup founders and larger businesses what the opportunities are that new technologies enable. And I've done that after that for Twitter as well. I worked at Amazon, on Amazon Alexa for a little while. And that passion of helping people to redefine what the future looks like has always been the driving factor there. So that brought me to Shardeum as well, because as I mentioned, there's a number of aspects in Shardeum and how it works that enables entirely new use cases. And I've been to places like Vietnam and India and Nigeria where there are large communities of incredibly clever people who could potentially do amazing things, but they don't have access. They don't know how to participate. They don't know how to get payments running in a way that you can accept global payments. They don't know how to access capital to get funding for their business ideas. There's so many roadblocks when you're in regions like that, where a Web3 solution that has very cheap transaction fees, is globally enabled and open to everyone, could fundamentally change the businesses that people could build in those regions. And that's major. Now, obviously, those are growth market ideas. If you take that to the larger markets, anything where you can have a 1 cent transaction fee of something that is transacted incredibly quickly is interesting for anyone because normal network fees are much higher than that. So that vision of empowering communities everywhere in the world aligned perfectly with what excites me the most about technology. So that's how I ended up here. And as VP of Developer Relations, my role is to be able to tell that story to the developer community, explain to them why it is much better than what they're doing today and why it's worth overcoming that inertia of change. And finally, helping them to be successful by providing resources like SDKs, code samples, and everything else that a developer would need.
Wow, that is pretty inspiring, Chris. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really fascinating to hear about your role in such an innovative and fast evolving space. And especially when we are seeing the demand for scalability and decentralization in the blockchain world, your contributions definitely mean a lot. And I think they kind of help shape Shardim's trajectory and capabilities also so far. I think moving ahead, when we're talking about decentralized finance, The breakthrough of these decentralized finance is that crypto assets can now be put to use in ways not possible that fiat or real world assets. I think decentralized exchanges, synthetic assets, and flash loans are completely novel applications that can only exist on blockchains. Now, this paradigm shift in the financial structure presents a number of advantage with regards to risk, trust, and even opportunities. So, we want to understand from you, Chris, what do you think is the current landscape in terms of usage of blockchain and in the DeFi evolution and as well as across different use cases? Or what are your views in terms of how we are using or leveraging the power of blockchain?
So it's interesting, right? Anytime that a new technology comes out, the thing that we do is do the things that we did previously, but then slightly better. Like I said, I've been in technology for a little while. So I remember the first time that smartphones came out. The first iPhone was around 2007. And the way that we used that was a smaller desktop computer. Websites were not made for small screens. The way that smartphone applications worked was just like a desktop with a mouse and keyboard. And that didn't quite work well for it. And it wasn't until Angry Birds came out. I don't know if you're familiar with that game, but it's this lovely game where you throw a bird at something to knock something else over. But what's interesting about it is that it used the touchscreen as a touchscreen. It was tactile. You pulled back a rubber band on the screen and let it go, and that had a physical effect. So instead of having an up and down button and a shoot button, you were suddenly engaging with it as if it was a real world thing. And that was groundbreaking at the time. That made so many people go, wow, this device means that we're now engaging with things, with digital applications in a completely more natural and different manner than we ever did before. And it takes a little while to get there. And I'm seeing that in DeFi as well, where the first popular solution that had seen was interbank settlements, because banks, when they transfer stuff to each other, obviously they assume that something is an exchange rate for currency or a price for a stock, et cetera, right? And at the end of a period, they have to go, well, what if there was a small timing mistake that meant there's a fraction of a cent difference in our understanding of the value of a thing? So you have this large group of people spending a bunch of time going through these transactions and the time at which they happened to settle the differences. And those differences often end up being millions of dollars because small differences at a huge scale still add up tremendously. So then blockchain came out, and there was now an independent way of saying this was the factual truth at this exact time in history. So there's no longer any dispute or confusion or misunderstanding of the current value at the time of that transaction. And that meant that for those transactions, you didn't need to do that settlement anymore. So that to me was step one. We're doing the things that we did before, only better and more efficiently. We'll see that continuing, I'm pretty sure. Because as a shape of innovation, I remember the beginning of Web 2. There's this website called Greg's List, and I'm sure a lot of people are still familiar with it. It is the most Web 1.0 website ever. White background, blue links, just text. And people can post wanted ads and other stuff on there. And it's used to buy secondhand stuff, to get someone to assemble a sofa for you, anything else that you might want to buy or sell or services offered. And then Web 2 came out, and a lot of founders went, hey, we can see the stuff that happens today on Craigslist. Let's use these new technologies and new innovations to do that thing that people already do, but then much better. I suspect that we will see a lot more of that with DeFi as well, where we use the efficiency, the speed, the scale, the low cost of transaction, and the certainty that these cryptographic signatures give you to do financial transactions we did previously better. What is really interesting to me, though, is the next step. Like Angry Birds was with the smartphone. At some point, you invent new ways of doing things, but also new things you can do. That's going to be the big evolution. And right now, a lot of that looks like using NFTs for certificates, showing that you accomplished something in the game. Like a classic mainstream example to me is chess.com, which is now using NFTs to show your ranking in the global chess community. And I think that's a wonderful use case, because that is a real desire that people have to have an authenticated way of showing how well you are doing. And it's a massive audience that isn't super technical, but would love to have something like a blockchain to store these things on. And by having a great user interface, this becomes easy and usable for everyone. And that to me is the most interesting aspect, where technology is often not interesting until it's technologically boring. I suspect it's where we'll see a lot of things go in the future.
Well, yes, definitely. And I think your insights helped us change our perspective on how blockchain is expanding beyond traditional use cases, especially when you look at the emergence of DeFi and how it's impacting the financial systems worldwide. And as we are definitely seeing the need and the shift towards a highly scalable, secure, and an interoperable blockchain network systems across the world, I would say. In your response, you also mentioned about, a Web3 and how we have come up, and, we had Web2 and now we have a Web3. Now, Web2, I mean, it is the internet of the past 2 decades. It's there of social media, user-generated content, and centralized platforms like Google, Amazon, or Facebook. And in Web3, I think data is predominantly controlled by few tech giants, and users typically have limited control over their own data and privacy. And now we are talking about Web3. It's more of a decentralized version of the internet built on blockchain technology. So can you help our listeners understand how Web3 is exactly different from the Web2 giants, despite the technical difference probably I just mentioned
Yeah.
currently? Yeah.
So as you mentioned, the thing that naturally happens is that over time, giants will take over if there's no natural constraints, right? Because they will amass more money, which means they get more talent. And over time, that size and mass that they build up means they crowd out everyone else out of the marketplace. And in a lot of ways, like if you're a shareholder of the company, that sounds like a wonderful thing. At the same time, it also strongly limits innovation, because a large giant is not necessarily seen for its innovative character, right? Quite the opposite most of the time. So Web3 aims to solve that by opening up participation for everyone. And that means that things like being able to log into a service can now be done with an identity that is stored in a decentralized network. And it might be worth expanding a little bit on the decentralized. Decentralized means there are multiple people running the same component of the network, and those people are not connected to each other legally or in any other way. They're probably not even in the same country. So by spreading out who runs the network globally through every different legislative perspective, socio-economic perspective, and background, you end up in a system that balances itself far more than a single organization ever could, because everyone is represented. And that is a different way of organizing things. So suddenly that also means that next to identity, you can also start thinking about payments. If I want to pay something because I bought something that was created in Indonesia, using DeFi or Web3 or crypto, there are no barriers. I can easily and cheaply pay that person. And that means I can suddenly do global business all over the place. It also means that things like compute resources, where can I run a server to host the services that I want to build, suddenly also becomes accessible to far more people. You don't have to live in a certain economic region to be empowered to host some servers or some services somewhere, because you can run it in a web-free environment, free from all the other constraints that you were facing previously. So all of these things, the thing that they have in common is that it breaks away a level of restrictions that would otherwise block the global community from participating with the global community.
Well, right. I think that's really important, and the shift that we are seeing currently. I mean, in terms of Web3, I think it's not just a technological evolution, but it's more like a philosophical shift towards a more user-centric and a decentralized and democratized internet governance, which gives more a control to users over their digital presence and value. And I think important in today's age where everything that's around us is completely digital. So having said that, I think when we talk from a business perspective, uh, for businesses that are looking forward to leverage blockchain into their respective businesses. So, I mean, initially, everybody thought that blockchain is just for cryptocurrencies, but now, the applications of blockchain are beyond cryptocurrencies that way. So, I think blockchain is inherently very transparent, and business can leverage this to foster trust with users. Whether you're working in a decentralized finance or healthcare or supply chain, transparency is such an essential aspect of every operation that eventually helps in building customer confidence in irrespective of your industry. So can you help us understand what are some of the key strategies that probably business owners can use in terms of increasing the chances of success in a Web3 business?
So there are multiple questions in that question, and which makes it so interesting, right? Like as you pointed out, one of the benefits of using this kind of technology is
Yeah.
that instead of using large, complicated systems, you can now optimize your logistical excellence by saying we are tracking something moving through our production network or industrial network or transport network, and we're tracking it on the blockchain. Each and every step signs that something has happened. And now you have full accountability, full traceability, and full transparency very cheaply and very efficiently, with information being available to everyone in near real time whenever it's required. That's massive. Like if you compare it to decades ago when people had pens and paper and phone lines, the difference is obvious, right? But even compared to modern day SAP based systems, this is just far cheaper and far faster to implement. And that's, of course, also true with if you think at any other solution, it opens up a completely new way of doing business. And that alone would create business success, because if you're operating under different margins and higher efficiency than your competitors, that is a very obvious advantage in any kind of industry. Beyond that, it also opens up the potential for expanding your markets. If you want to be able to sell globally and you have a shipping company like DHL or whatever nearby that could ship anywhere globally, why would you not want to be able to sell your products anywhere or provide your services anywhere or sign someone up to do cool stuff for you, like any kind of performer, musician, service provider, educator? Suddenly the global market opens up to you because you're able to transact with anyone anywhere. So anything from logistical excellence all the way up to expanding your total addressable market to be a far more global concept, all of those things are incredibly interesting. So I would say the key strategy to success is looking at what you're doing right now and saying, is it either interesting for me to change who I can do business with or recruit? Or is it possible to replace some of the things I'm doing today with something that is faster and cheaper and better?
Right, it definitely makes sense. And of course, we need a technological solution that not only helps in scaling our business, but also gives like a more an affordable option that probably helps us in keeping a cost low simultaneously as well. Now, we really want to shift gears and talk more about your role specifically. I mean, I really want to talk about developer relations. Because as Web3 continues to grow, so too does the importance of developer relations. Now, because in Web3, developers are the key to creating decentralized applications or smart contracts and even some innovative solutions. So the role of a developer relation is not only to support these developers with technical knowledge, but also to bring and build a stronger developer community around some open source projects as well. And accordingly, I think the demand for skilled developers will also grow, making developer relations an increasingly critical component of a business strategy, specifically in the Web3 business space. So, how do you think is the developer relations evolving, and what does the future look like for them?
So it's interesting. Like in general, technology is going through a bit of a reinvention in some areas there's this concept of the zero interest rate phenomenon, ZERP, where a lot of companies could borrow money essentially for free, which meant they could invest very widely as well, as long collectively it would at least break even or create a profit. And that meant that people experimented a lot, and that includes developer relations as well, where for a long time people were trying to figure out what works best. Do you need people who are hardcore builders that tell their stories and share their experiences? Or do you need more of an influencer kind of model, or people who create great content and get the word out? Now, I personally have the sense that we're going more towards the builder model rather than influencer model now, where we've seen that storytelling is important because it allows people to understand where the opportunities are. But you also need people who are able to sit down and say, look, I've built the kind of thing that you've built. I know what pain points you're going to run into, what trouble you're going to have to while building this, and we're going to be able to tell you how to solve it. We will be able to tell the story of how other people have solved deep technical issues with fantastic solutions and empower you to be successful. So that to me is one of the changes that we're definitely seeing, where things are becoming more practical and visceral in that sense of, let's sit down with you and make you successful and help you to build the thing that you're envisioning. The other thing that we're seeing, as you said, like developers have always been a critical part of any kind of platform where you're hoping to reach large audiences and enable other people to build businesses that help you to get to those audiences. And it's the let the thousand flowers bloom philosophy, right? Of as long as enough people are putting their brains into creating awesome solutions, some of those are going to be wildly successful. And that's how you figure out what the future looks like. So much of developer relations is moving in that direction as well of how do we solve some of the problems around onboarding, creating fantastic experiences, finding those new cool things that people can now build that weren't possible before, connecting new regions that previously weren't connected as such at that level. Those are interesting challenges. So we're going from just the storytelling to the storytelling and a lot of technical support. That's been a big change for us.
Right, and I think that that clearly justifies the role of developer relations and how the future might look like. And I think looking forward to 2025, Web3 is set to grow exponentially across multiple sectors. I think we'll have more efficiency, more automated processes across different industries, with blockchain providing the secure backbone for data exchange. So, having said that, what are some of the key trends that you think would take over the Web3 industry in the coming years, Chris?
That is a tough question, right? Like reading tea leaves is a challenge. But
Yeah.
like in general, technology is permeating more and more of our lives. So it's everything from entertaining to forming relationships to doing business. Those are growing industries and there's no slowing down there whatsoever. Like look at trends like trendy things like TikTok that grew and blew past a billion users in no time whatsoever. And the potential for reaching those kind of growths in new kinds of businesses and new kind of solutions is 100% there because it is still a wide open, unexplored area of what the future will look like. Now, I think that the key things that we're seeing things develop in right now is definitely like the gaming sector. Being able to show off the cool items that you have, the things that you've accomplished, those are a big deal. It's one of those psychological intrinsic motivations to be able to show to your peers what you've accomplished and get respect for it. So that is a short-term prediction that's relatively easy to do. Long term, I expect that as soon as we've accomplished something like an Apple Wallet and Android Pay Store integration, being able to transact with crypto everywhere is going to be a massive deal as well. Imagine never having to deal with exchange rates or credit card network taking 10% of your transactions, or any of those kind of things that are currently extracting value of the commerce that is happening of the planet, and not having to deal with that anymore. That would be amazing. So we'll see when we get there. That's the goal.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think the potential of this new ecosystem is vast, and it could have a significant impact on how users conduct financial transactions in the future. And first and foremost, it seems possible that decentralized finance will provide banking services to people who are currently unbanked. And these people are likely in need of a banking system, and this suddenly becomes possible using, a decentralized finance technology-driven solutions. So I feel as we move forward, it's clear that Web3 is not just a trend, but more like a fundamental shift in how we think about digital interactions in the finance and ownership space. And I think for business and developers alike, the opportunities are immense. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It was a pleasure having you with us. We discussed about the importance of Web3. What are some key strategies that probably Web3 businesses can deploy in terms of scaling their business, and what probably the future can look like? So, thank you so much for your insights. It was a pleasure and fun chatting with you.
Likewise, it's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Chris. So, this is for our listeners. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you like today's episode, I'm sure you're going to hit the like button on Spotify and other leading platforms. Meanwhile, you can also view them on SoundCloud and other platforms. Until next time, you can keep innovating and exploring the future of decentralized finance. Thank you so much.